You're watching The Experience, Comic Culture and Sales, streaming live daily to Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter.
To slab or not to slab? That is the question. Whether it is nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune and hope you get a 9.8, or to take chances by keeping books raw. I don't know that Shakespeare would appreciate what I just did to his words. I don't know that the comments are going to appreciate what I just did to Shakespeare. But we're going to talk about whether or not you should slab your books. This is the Devil's Advocates. I'm producer Kyle. Joining me in just a minute is Bronze Age Nerd. We're going to kick this thing into high gear in just a second. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. If you're watching on Bronze Age Nerd channel, click the link in the description to join the experience and click the bell. If you're watching on the experience, go over to Bronze Age Nerd channel, click the bell, do the things, and then I'm going to take a drink of water and we're going to start the show. This is Devil's Advocates. I don't know why midway through the cold open I decided to try and do it in one breath.
Probably not a great idea.
Yeah, mistakes were made.
unless you're working up your Hamlet soliloquies for Broadway or something, I wouldn't recommend it.
I've done Shakespeare in the park several times. I've never done Hamlet. I've done Midsummer Night's Dream twice. So I'm a fan of Shakespeare. I've done Shakespeare. I'm bad at Shakespeare, but
I did Henry IV part 1. That's my only one I've done.
Yeah, I've never done any of the Henrys, but I have turned into a donkey several times on stage. Welcome.
Oh boy, we already have chat going off. I love it.
We already have the chat going off, and we're gonna open the phone lines early this week so y'all can call in and tell us what you're thinking. But we're gonna wait just a second and kind of set up the premise of the show first. Then we're gonna open the phone lines, and then you can call and tell us we're idiots, which is what I expect to happen most of the time. So last week we were talking about first appearance, and somebody made a comment about CGC, and it got us thinking about it, right? And we mentioned last week that CGC not always the most accurate when it comes to stuff because, well, they don't know what a first appearance is. So building on last week's topic and the thoughts we had, we decided to talk about what should you or shouldn't you slab. So how should we start?
Well, I actually, I like to zoom out. So let's zoom out and take a one further 10,000 foot high level view of this too, which is not just what books should be slabbed, but should books be slabbed. And I think that is a very contested debate among the community. And it's kind of like the lens that I look through all this from, because no matter what your opinion on which books to slab, you're going to have people that be like, well, why would you slab it at all in the first place? And so I'd love for us to start out, and you let me know if you're cool with this. I'd love for us to start out with a small pros and cons of reasons why you should slab at all and reasons why maybe you shouldn't slab. Does that sound cool to you?
Yes.
Yeah. So I will lead off since that's my premise here. The biggest reason that I think most people are going to slab is resale value. And that's actually a funny one to bring up because there is this slight shift happening right now in the market for resale value on slabs versus raw. I think some of that's explainable, and I can get into that a little bit later. But I think that is the biggest reason that most people are going to slab a comic book, is because it sort of takes some of the guesswork out of what the value or grade of the comic book might be to a degree. It might add some other questions. But in general, I think that's what it does, especially when you're talking about CGC, CBCS, kind of the bigger names in grading, and kind of locks in a value that the market can agree upon, as opposed to the range that the market might agree upon for a raw book. And sometimes, having a certified 9.8 oftentimes will mean a lot more than a book that is clearly a 9.8 just looking at it raw. So that might be worth more. And that's true for pretty much every grade level. So that's the reason I would bring up. Do you have a good reason why people should slab?
Because there are more than one Kyles. That's a good reason why people should slap. Yes, I do.
Good point.
Shout out to the other Kyle. Solidarity.
There's a few of them out there.
Oh, I graduated with 4. So, um, I'm a fan of slabs. I'll be real honest. But I'm a fan of slabs for very specific reasons. And I actually, in my notes I sent you, I actually listed my very specific reasons. I don't think value should have any factor in whether or not you slab. It's a nice benefit, but it shouldn't be a factor as to why you should or shouldn't slab books.
Okay.
Or specifically, on the whole, grade anything. I mean, I have graded currency. I didn't grade the currency because I thought it would make the currency worth more. I did it for a reason. I did it for the same reason I graded this X-Men 55. Because if I didn't, it'd be dust. Right? Like value to me isn't a reason to slab a book. However, preservation is.
Well,
and
interesting.
Nice added is an added value proposition. This being worth more because of that certainly doesn't hurt my, doesn't hurt the thought of it, but it does. It isn't the first reason.
Wow. So I think we're already coming in with some fire here, because I actually disagree with that reason to slab. I don't think slabbing, especially when I don't know anything about currency, other forms of encapsulation when it comes to other types of collectibles, and as far as how it affects preservation or anything like that kind of stuff. When it comes to comic books, though, I'd argue that you actually might be not doing damage actively, but if you leave it in that slab long term, moisture does become an issue. There's nothing, I'm not going to like sit here and say like encapsulating your comic pure and simple is bad for your comic book. I don't want that to be misunderstood. But I think there are just as good, if not better, ways to protect your comic books than grading them if value isn't the chief reason for doing it. Archival paper, archival mylars, fullbacks, from like a company like E. Gerber, for example.
You made a post about boards.
Yep.
Exactly. Yeah, having the right bagging board is just as important and could be just as life-saving for a comic as slabbing it. 100%.
I would say more so, and I want to mention the reason why I ultimately say that. I'm going to take CGC, for example. CBCS is a little bit different on this, but CGC is by far the more popular company that people use. So I'm going to address that specifically. If you're not familiar, there is a piece of a special type of paper inside your CGC slabbed comic book. And the idea for that piece of paper is that it's supposed to help control the environment that's inside that slab, which isn't airtight, but it is a mostly sealed environment. It's more sealed up than it would be just sitting out on its own, right? There's a piece of paper in there that is designed to kind of absorb some of the off-gassing that happens on that book, and sort of neutralize some of the acidity environment, kind of neutralize the pH. In other words, when I say neutralize, that's what I mean. Now that moisture chamber paper that's in there is not really designed to be left in there for decades or a long time. Now I will say that originally CGC was like, yeah, every 5 years you're going to want to replace that, which sounds kind of like a planned obsolescence thing if you want to be a tinfoil hat kind of person about it. Yeah, the micro chamber paper. That was the word I was struggling around. Thank you so much, Mark. But really, they found, through cracking a lot of older slabs, that paper probably lasts longer than 5 years, but there's no way it's going to last 10, 15, 20 years. So my main point is just to make sure that, if you're going to be doing that, you need to eventually get it re-encapsulated, reholstered, whatever you want to call it, to conclude a new piece of micro chamber paper to help protect that book.
Oh, certainly. And that's the other part of this, right? That I kind of mentioned in my notes, right? When you slab a book, you have to know what you're getting into. You can't just say, oh, I graded it. You have to know what you're doing once you do that. So again, this isn't a copy of X-Men 55. It's an old book. It would be dust if it wasn't in this slab, because it was literally crumbling in my hands, before I handed it to CGC. This book will go back to CGC next year because it's been slabbed for 4 years. I know that that's something I'm going to spend money on, preserving this book. Now, in my intention with this book is to have upgraded it by then from a 4.0 copy to a copy that I would be comfortable putting in a Mylar bag and board, or a more high quality bag and board, and just getting rid of the slab entirely. So there's some importance of knowledge of what you're getting into, in terms of, you don't buy a car and not know you need to put gas in it. You don't slab a book and not know what kind of maintenance you need for those slabs.
Yeah. If you don't know you're going to need to change the oil filter in your
Right.
car, you're in for a bad time.
Right. So that's one of the things. One of my other reasons is personal reasons. I have books like this that are slabbed because they're important books to me.
Mhm.
Right? That I'm always going to own a slabbed copy of that book. But it's one of those, is I'm good with the process again. So I have one of the books I don't have here. I have a first appearance of Dazzler, graded 9.8 at home. That is the first book I ever bought with my own money. Not an important book by any means. It's Dazzler. They're in dollar bins everywhere, or they're pretty easy to come by. But it's important.
Bins.
But it's important to me, right?
Yeah.
So I got that book graded when I was in my early 20s, after keeping it in a bag and board and protecting it. Then when I was 26 and I sent it back to get re-slabbed so that the paper could be changed out, I had it pressed for the first time, which brought the grade up. And then when I turned 31, I sent it back again and had it actually cleaned, and it went up a little more. And that's how I got to a high quality copy. And it's not a blue slab anymore, but I don't really care, because that book is a book that I intend to own until the day I die.
I love that comment.
I do too. I love.
Respect.
I'll be honest. Romita Jr.'s art was the first art I could pick out from across the room. So any Romita Jr. art is going to be close to me, and so that one is super important.
I'm gonna throw another kind of related reason out there for slabbing, and this is what started me on the journey to slabbing. It's actually part of how I started my YouTube channel. Was I knew I was going to be doing some grading with CGC. Saw so many videos and unboxings and all that, and kind of turned me on to it. I wasn't really aware of it in the way that I am now before. And the reason why I chose the books I chose, for the most part, a couple of them were because I wanted to resell them. But by and large, the ones that I sent that first batch were ones that I wanted to pass down someday. I wanted to, give those off to my family. And something I think a lot of collectors don't really think about is what's going to happen to their collection if they die. I understand why people may not think about that. It's a morbid topic, of course, but it's something I think a lot of collectors neglect. And you think about where a lot of these collections come from that people end up picking up. They get passed down. The people that have them don't know what to do with them. And what often happens with those collections is that they are sold for a fraction of what they're worth. Why is that? Try to put yourself in your loved one's shoes. Do they know how to price a comic book? Do they know what's a key issue or not? Do they want to take on that kind of project? If they're not doing that every day with you, it's something you really want to consider. And if you take some of your, issues that any collector that owns a collection probably knows, that, hey, these are worth something, or they're going to be worth something. If I pass this on to my wife, child, other extended family, whatever, I don't want them to have no idea what the value is. It's a lot easier to figure out the value of a graded comic book, a graded collectible. That's one of the reasons that people do it. And it also helps with another factor that's kind of related to that, as far as like value goes, and that's insurance value. If you want your collection to be insured, it's a lot easier to say, hey, this is a, CBCS 4.0 Amazing Fantasy 15 than a mid-grade Amazing Fantasy 15. Here's some pictures that prove that 25 years ago. So those are some reasons I could think of why I'm kind of firm in the camp of pro grading.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I'm also pro in the camp of grading, but I'm very much a your mileage varies, make your own decisions, don't be an idiot kind of guy when it comes to grading.
100%.
I will give you a prime example. In my family collection, which was started by my grandfather back in the late 50s, we have more than one Amazing Fantasy 15. Most of them would be a no grade. Let's be real. They're rough, but they've never been graded. They've never been in any kind of encapsulation. They've always been in a Mylar or another high-end sort of protection device. Now they're in you named them earlier. They're a real high-end bag with a real high-end board.
My lights and full backs from eGerber. There's other companies.
The eGerber stuff.
Yeah.
And they're in top loaders. Really thick top loaders so they don't get smashed. And they live in a bank vault. They're not just in a long box, right? We've taken steps to do that. And Mark's not wrong. You can get a valuation, use top loaders and Mylar. Yep. But for a normie, they're not going to know that process. Whereas there are many apps and websites you can go to that say, I have a 9/8 this. How much is it worth? What's FMV? And it's easy. But every few years, my grandfather has our collection appraised professionally by graders from, now it's CBCS, it used to be CGC, for insurance purposes. If the house catches on fire, how much money do we get? Just on comics. And so having those valuations is certainly added because of grades, but not necessarily inherent to them. So that's something to know. Ship, I know I need a drink of water, but I'm in the middle of talking.
Hey, real fast before we move on, I just kind of want to acknowledge this. So if you're used to my shows where it's just me alone, I engage with chat every single message pretty much. We are going to open up the phone lines in a little bit here where you could actually get a chance to call in and talk to us. I just want to kind of get used to the flow of this show with Kyle and I. We definitely will hit all the high points on chat. We have a lot of people in here. I love it. Keep doing it. We may not get to your chat messages quite as quickly. Please don't think we're ignoring you. We're both reading every single one.
In fact, I've been waiting to come back to this. Mark has what I think is a brilliant idea. Imagine a grading company actually offering maintenance plans on your books in your collection. If they are barcoded, registered to your CGC account, it could be an expansion item for them. So you can pay a service, pay a fee, and send your books back, and they would do that maintenance of re-slabbing, reholdering, all of that kind of stuff every X number of years. I think that's genius.
Yeah, that's absolutely.
I would pay a lot more money to these companies than I already do for that service. Because I don't have the CGC professional tier anymore, or whatever the hell they call it. Premium. I got rid of it. It wasn't worth the money anymore. I was sending more stuff to CBCS because I thought I got a better value, better turnaround times, and more consistency. But I would go back if I could have that service. So I think that's genius.
Yeah, that's absolutely an amazing idea. I'm actually surprised they don't offer something along those lines, especially for think about some of the large collections that CGC has, for example, where you have the registry. Oh God, what do they call it? The collections that you compare against each other. I've never participated.
Census.
The census. Thank you. If you have those large collections, imagine what somebody would pay if you said, hey, I have 200, 300, 500 slabs. I want to be able to send them in every 5 years for maintenance and change out the microchamber paper and re-slab and all that stuff. Oh, that'd be such a good idea. That's stupid they haven't done that.
Mm-hmm. No, it's true. I think it's genius. Good thought, Mark. So we need to take our first commercial break here in a second, but I had one more reason to slab. One more reason why I think slabbing is important. And on my notes, I wrote verification. One of the things that I enjoy collecting as part of my combo collection, you can see it here, is this original cover art. These aren't graded. These are just framed, but I have some that are graded as art. And the reason I have them graded is because now I get that verification that, oh, this was actually done by this person at this convention on this day. Same as with signature verification. Because otherwise, you might not believe that the Ken Hazer cover art that I had drawn, or I was at a tattoo convention a few weeks ago, and I brought my buddy who works for CBCS to witness it. And I had, I'm going to blank on his name, Tony Moore, do a sketch cover for me because he's at a tattoo convention. He had no line.
Nice.
Right. It's the easiest I've ever walked up and talked to Tony Moore.
Smart.
So I had him do a sketch cover for me, and I had my buddy from CBCS come with it to witness it. Because now I have that verification that this actually happened here on this day. And that to me is another important reason to grade. Because
on top of that, you're talking about restoration, catching that if you can't catch it yourself, verifying that the book is authentic, although there have been issues. But catching some of those things where it might be a forgery.
Right.
Yeah. So 100%.
Right now, if nobody can say to me, well, he wasn't at a convention that weekend. He just wasn't at a comic convention that weekend.
Yep.
It really does sort of add a level of, now my inventory is true.
Yep.
And I think that's an important thing to remember, is that one of the benefits, at least to getting your books witnessed and then graded, is that verification level. So, all right, do we want to take our first break and then open the phone lines when we come back?
Perfect. Yeah, guys, if you're in the chat, the commercial break, just explain what it is real fast, because I know some viewers are like, what are you talking about? We talk about some other program that comes up here over on the EXP. By the way, if you're not currently subbed to the EXP, I know I love you watching on my channel if you're watching over on the Bronze Age Nerd channel, but we are going to be only streaming over on the EXP. This is supposed to be an EXP show. We're just trying to let you guys all know where I'm hanging out every Monday from here on out. So there's like maybe one more show where we'll do this kind of simulcast on these two channels. And then after that, it'll be on all the EXP channels, which is Facebook, Twitch, their YouTube page, all kinds of great stuff. And you can definitely go check us out over there. So there's a link in the description if you want to go hit that up, and then check out some commercials for some upcoming programming here on the EXP.
You know how when you go to Comic-Con, after Comic-Con, you go to the hotel bar, and there's a whole bunch of people playing music and dancing, and you've got Pikachu and Lara Croft Tomb Raider doing the cha-cha slide just down from Deadpool and Batman and Wonder Woman? That's every Saturday night over on the Experience Twitch channel. Join Taji Beats for the EXP Dance Party, exclusively on Twitch, twitch.tv/the_EXP.
To be continued. 3 little words that hold the secret to the next great story. 3 words that will thrill you, confound you, give life to new possibilities. Every variation of To Be Continued is a promise. A promise of adventure. A promise of excitement. A promise of unseen wonders and unexplored worlds. A promise that every issue you read makes you a part of a never-ending journey. And behind every page, there will be an unopened door waiting for you. This story to be continued at your local comic book shop today. Visit comicshoplocator.com today.
Why was Princess Zelda sad after watching a bunch of YouTube videos? She couldn't find the link in the description. We'll stop if you subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's super easy. Click subscribe and click the bell when you do. And thanks for supporting the EXP. What's up, everybody? I was investigating soft slabs because that's a thing I want to spend money on. I see Mark, talking about him. I see Mark talking about him, And it's something that I really am interested in trying to find somebody in the U.S. who would do that. So that's awesome.
That's cool. Yeah, I know, for example, CBCS does the raw verification. I know EGS does that as well here in the States. I'm not sure who else offers that, but I'm not sure if they offer any kind of thicker case or protection with those services.
X11, I appreciate that. You subscribing and still not knowing who I am. That's how I want it. I'm the man behind the curtain. I am the great and powerful Oz. Don't look at the man behind the curtain with the bald head and the apparent breakout happening on his forehead in his mid-30s. I appreciate that. Right. Ship. We're gonna just start playing that Who song. I'm gonna reach out and try and get it licensed. So we're gonna open the phone lines for those of you who are new. One of the cool things that I have here in my studio is the phones. Just like talk radio or really any of those things, you can call in and be on the show. And I see that Mark is in Australia. You can call in from anywhere in the world. It's a good phone number. It's 1-567-318-6507. Jay, add the 1 in front for our international friends. 1-567-318-6507. And you can call in and be on the air. We can put you right through on the air and talk about it. Talk to us about your thoughts on slabbing.
That's a nice callback.
Preston, I had the part of my brain that knew about Limp Bizkit burned out of it. And Eddie, it is a Toledo area code. I am in northwestern Ohio. So if you're here too, what's up, bro? Enjoy the weather before it turns to fall here in about 2 days. So I had on my notes a list of times to maybe slab. And the reason I broke this down when I did my Be a Better Collector show where I talked about slabbing was this idea that sometimes it's an unavoidable circumstance and it's something that you just have to kind of deal with. One of those is availability. There are books that I've wanted to own for years that I've only ever come across in the wild slabbed.
Yep.
I've read them. I appreciate that, Steve.
Oh, I think we both highlighted at the same time and it canceled each other out. That's how happy we were that you sent in that super chat. Thanks a lot for that.
Yep. Former, it's scrolling right there at the bottom. I don't know how to do what you're talking about from the platform we're on. Here in StreamYard. Let me look at something here. Nope. All I can do is put myself in timeout. So it's scrolling right there at the bottom. Jay can throw it in the comments if you want. But anyway, so availability. Sometimes you can only buy a book and have it be slabbed, and then you got to go through that process of finding a flathead screwdriver and crack it open.
Yep.
Oh, I see you. Yeah, no. So you know, like that's an unfortunate side effect sometimes of grading. The other one that I mentioned is cost. Sometimes you can get a better deal if you send more stuff in. So you might send a book that you wouldn't otherwise send just to get that dollar price down. Not always a case. It's a lot of times it's for dealers and, you know, people are sending hundreds of books at a time to get that bulk rate, but it's something to consider. It's a maybe situation. Didn't want to spend too much time on the maybes because they make very little sense to most humans. You know, most of the time you can find stuff you're looking for raw. You don't need to hunt her down and only find a slab. And then, like I said, unless you're sending massive amounts of books, you can't get a bulk discount. So, do we want to talk about the arguments against slabbing?
Yeah, and I think so. Let me kind of organize my thoughts here. So we want to talk about the arguments against slabbing, but we also want to talk about purchasing slabs, and I think they're kind of intertwined in a way because one of the primary arguments against slabbing that I hear is for X reason I don't like slabs. I'm never going to try to convince somebody that you should like something you don't like. it's a waste of effort and it's a waste of brain power, and that's not how free will works. I totally understand there are good reasons why, and we're going to get into some of them. But the kind of weird bridge there, I think, is that some people who hate slabs might sometimes be behooving themselves to buy them. That sounds weird. What am I talking about? There are certain books, a lot of people, there's a very common phrase in our hobby called "buy the book, not the grade." If you can look at a good high quality scan of a book, like on eBay or Heritage or some of the other, auction sites or in person, and you think, you know what, that book is better than the grade of the slab. Well, I got news for you. That's just a plastic prison. You can bust that sucker out of there anytime you want to. And there's people that just refuse to buy a slab because they hate them. But you might find the book you're looking for inside one of those pieces of plastic. So that's kind of the weird edge case where I'd say don't always thumb your nose at looking at a slab just because you're opposed to them in general. The other thing is, and this is kind of the other side edge case here, there's a lot of people that look at companies like PGX. There's other companies that people look at this way, and they just kind of write them off. You might want to reconsider that because I'll tell you a little secret. If you really want to make some good money on flipping, buy some poorly graded slabs from other companies. The comic book is poorly graded, as in they undergraded it. Crack it, clean press, submit to company of your choice, and you can probably up the resale value on that comic book. There was
a long time where I would pay less for a CGC or less for a PGX book than I would for grading from another company. Okay, we have a call. You ready?
Ready.
What's up? You're on the show. Davidson, Michigan.
Hey, it's Ed Weird. How you doing?
Ed, what's up, buddy? Can you guys hear Ed?
I can hear you just fine.
All right. What's up, Eddie?
I've never really considered myself a comic collector, as more of a comic reader. I've always loved comics, and I've been buying them since I was like 5 or 6 with my money that I'd get from my dad every week. And a few years ago, probably about 15 years ago, I let somebody talk me into slabbing my older ones that meant the most to me. And if I'm hearing you guys right, did I possibly damage them by having them in a slab for 15 years? Because I'm talking, I have the Invincible Iron Man 1. I have Submariner number 1. I have a bunch of number 1s that I had slab because they said they'd keep them forever. And now I'm hearing I might have screwed up.
So I'll dive into that real fast. So here's the good news. By the way,
hold on. Ed, turn your stream down.
I've muted my TV.
Okay, because we're getting a ton of echo. Like when you call into a radio show and they leave the radio up.
Yeah, I've got it muted. There's nothing on, so I can take you off speaker, but
that might be
I'm hard of hearing.
Leave us on. It's fine. I just want to let you know. Leave it like it is.
Okay. Right. So here's what I'll give you as far as advice goes there. I don't think you probably have destroyed the book that's in there or anything by any stretch of the imagination. The probably the worst case scenario is there's been a slight amount of, and I'm talking almost certainly slight amount of moisture damage done. It's impossible to say without looking at the books, but especially for modern books, what we're discovering is that most slabbed modern comic books, like the Invincible Iron Man you mentioned, is probably going to be okay in that kind of environment for a lot longer than 5 years. When you do talk about some of those older books, I start to worry a little bit more about what's going to happen with them. But unless, the same rules apply that apply to storing your raw comic books. Cool, dry, climate controlled is great. Don't store them in an attic. Don't store them in a hot shed. Don't store them in a room that gets a lot of moisture in the winter. Those kinds of rules apply. And if you're doing that on top of it being the slab, the odds of hurting the comic book are pretty low, at least substantially hurting the comic book. So you're almost certainly going to be, I don't think you're not going to crack the thing open and open the comic book and find out it's disintegrated inside. I would be amazed if something like that happened. But you may want to consider sending the comic books back in if you want it slab still, and seeing if you can get that reholster, which costs I think usually less than the price of grading in the first place. I can't remember what the current rate is, like for say CGC, for example, but it's just a smaller fee to reholster the comic book.
Right. And Ed, the part of the world where we live, you have to have pretty good climate control, because in the part of the world where we live, it's summer today and it will be fall tomorrow and winter the next day. So having them in that kind of space where you've got pretty decent climate control, your house isn't getting too hot or too cold or too humid or too dry, really helps. I have a significant amount of comics in, not the room behind me, because that's the audio production studio, the room on the other side, that I've blacked out the windows, and I have a humidifier, dehumidifier setting in there so that room is perfectly climate controlled and taken care of, because I'm a weirdo. Because that's just my OCD. So part of it is this area where you live certainly helps, as opposed to my friends in Arizona who their books catch on fire if they take them outside in the summer. So that's certainly a thing that's to your benefit. But yeah, several, it wouldn't hurt, especially on the real high end stuff, to have them reholstered or reholdered. It's usually about half of what a full grade would be, because they're just going to take and flip out the inside, fix the plastic, that kind of stuff. It's not a bad.
So do you send the whole slab back, or do you take it out of the slab and send it back?
Send it back just as it sits.
Yep, exactly. In fact, if you take it out, they are going to regrade your comic book, which is probably not going to be good for the grade of the comic book, most likely. Whereas what happens if you send it back in a slab to reholster, they're going to look at it, and unless something is crazy different, they aren't even going to regrade that comic book. They can. There is a possibility of them doing that, but most likely they're not going to.
They won't even reprint this piece of paper unless there's a significant change. They'll just literally slide this piece of paper into the new slab.
Now, when it comes to my comics, I'm anal like you are, Kyle. I've got them in a water fireproof comic safe in my closet, in my bedroom, where it's always cool and dry.
Right.
So, and that's where I keep all my boxes too. I probably got 30 short boxes in that closet.
Yeah.
So, but I only slabbed the really old ones because everybody told me, oh, it'll keep them safe forever. So once I did that, I just kind of forgot about them and put them in my safe. But after hearing you guys talking about that, I kind of panicked a little bit. And I wondered if I ruined my comics.
Yeah, no. Like I said, and it really is keep them safe forever. But again, it's like your car, right? You got to change the oil. So your car might run forever, especially if you have a car that, is well built, car. But you got to change the oil. You got to do the maintenance, and it's the same with slabs.
Gotcha.
The best way I could put it, the best way I can describe it is, a lot of people know the Library of Congress. They store comic books for archival purposes. A lot of amazing comic books. Actually, seeing part of their collection is fantastic. Oddly enough, they don't store them in CGC holsters. So the biggest takeaway there is, if you look at people who are used to archiving documents and pieces of paper, how do they store? And they store a certain way. And that is archival paper, things like Mylar materials instead of the poly bags. But I don't want to scare anybody into thinking that like your comic books are going to be destroyed in a CG holder. I'm not saying that. I just want people to know that it isn't a fire and forget kind of a thing either. You do kind of have to every once in a while check back in. I honestly would probably go like every 10 years on like a modern book and feel totally fine, even longer, really. But yeah, just something to know about for sure, and kind of keep in the back of your mind, especially if you're not storing them in a perfectly climate controlled environment.
I'm going to do a show for the EXP, a special for the EXP coming up. I'm going to Columbus, Ohio to tour the Billy Ireland comic art collection, which is at the Ohio State University Library. It's the largest single collection of strip comics and comic art from before, I forget what it is, 1965, something like that.
Cool.
In one place. And I found out that they store hermetically sealed mayonnaise jar.
I love it.
But they store the stuff at 64 degrees and 0% humidity. and they spend millions and millions of dollars a year just on the energy to make sure that that room never moves from 64 degrees and 0% humidity. It's ridiculous. And I'm very excited to go tour and check out that collection. I'm going for a very specific purpose, but that's another story for another day. So I want to thank you, Ed, for calling in. I appreciate you being here all the time on the experience shows and being in basically every show, and for calling in tonight. I'm gonna let you go so other people have a chance to call in if they would like.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Nice getting a chance to talk to you, man.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to call in and talk, 567-318-6507, 567-318-6507. The Zombie Prophet, thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like I said, guys, you know, a lot of viewers that I've had a really good experiences with in the past right here talking, chatting. Just want a quick shout out. Thanks all of you for showing up and checking this out. Bleeker, K-pop, Zombie Prophet, Eddie's Mullet, all you guys, you're all awesome. Thank you so much for being here.
Right. So should we move on to the don't slab arguments?
I think we should, unless we have another caller come in, which of course we'll give you guys priority if you call in. But yeah, definitely. Let's check out the devil's advocate side of the equation.
So the first one, and somebody said it in here, I don't want a comic collection of just covers. I want to be able to interact with the books. And I hear that a lot from people. I want to be able to read my comics.
100%.
That is a fair argument. I can't fault you for that.
Yep.
However, I go back to, and the reason that I don't subscribe to that is I go back to this guy. If I held it in my hands, it would turn into dust. Now, there's nothing to say I can't buy a better copy, and I certainly will, but I got that one graded to protect it for as long as I had it. I actually was at a convention once, and I had a Preston. There shouldn't be in Ohio either. It's the whole state's built on a swamp, but they figured it out with enough money and enough electricity. You can do it.
Richard, come on. Cyclops is right.
It doesn't. It has Havoc ship, so identify your X-Men. I was selling I had a graded Sandman #1. And I was selling it to a person, and the vendor at the booth next to me comes over in the middle of the transaction and says, I don't know why you would ever grade a comic. You can't read it. And I turned to him and said, I don't know why you would ever sleep in your car with a bunch of garbage bags with your inventory in it, but sure enough, it works for you. Because that guy was, and we're not allowed to booth next to each other at conventions anymore because I will punch him right square in the nose. But at the same time, I understand the argument.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, again, I would never, yuck anybody's yum. If you are if you're buying and reading comic books sheerly for the purpose of you reading those comic books, sharing them, as Richard mentioned, if you want to, God, who doesn't love cracking open an old book and getting just that whiff of that old paper and ink? It is a fantastic smell that is I'm pretty sure it's addictive.
Yeah.
100%. I don't think anybody should be faulted for that. I had the most important comic book to me in my entire collection. Not the most valuable, it's not the rarest or anything like that. It's the most important to me for sentimental reasons, is my childhood copy of G.I. Joe #1 that my dad gave me for my birthday. I've talked about it on my channel before. It's an important issue. It means a lot to me. It's where my love of comic book collecting comes from. It's a gift from my dad. And as a testament to how, I try to take care of my comic books, I had that book since I was, I think, about 8 or 9 years old. I can't remember exactly what year I got it. And when I talked about submitting that batch of comic books to CGC, that thing got a 9.6 back from CGC. It did get pressed before that, but still, I think that's pretty good for a comic book that I've had since I was 9 years old as a kid collector. But I had that internal struggle. Do I want to send this comic book off? Because that's a comic book that, from time to time, I really enjoyed cracking open and reading. The end result for me was, well, I could always open it back up. And I've read that comic book, that actual issue, dozens of times. And also, I read more digitally now. That's me. That's probably, by the way, a future show topic is digital comic books, yay or nay, as far as like reading them goes, because it's a very hot button topic.
Can I tell you real quick? I just had my opinion on that change over the last 2 weeks.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
So maybe that's a next week.
Yeah. A little teaser there. So for me, I made the decision to go ahead and do it. Now, in an alternate universe, the next multiverse universe over, I 100% didn't slab that comic book. And it's because I wanted to be able to open it up and read it. And no one should tell you, oh, you're dumb for not slabbing your comic books or anything like that. That is silly. Don't anybody tell you that. But the flip side of that I really want to address is this kind of attitude. And I saw it got mentioned earlier in chat, and I've seen this on Reddit a lot. That's what the chat comment said too. I think Zombie Prophet was the one that said this, if I'm not mistaken. Is this concept that if you slab a comic book, you are defacing the comic book, you are degrading the comic book, you are somehow destroying it or keeping it in plastic prison or adding to the downfall of the hobby. And that, to me, it's the same argument the other way. If I want to slab my comic books, I don't think you should tell me that I shouldn't or shouldn't do that. I should or shouldn't do that. I think that should be the collector's personal opinion. The biggest reason why is because it's not permanent. It's not like you can never crack that thing open again. If you sell it to somebody, if you hand it down, whatever, you can. It's just something that some people want to do for think of it as a temporary thing. Everything's temporary, right? This is a temporary thing that doesn't actually harm the comic book actively, especially if you take care of it like we talked about earlier.
Right.
So
I'm going to hit a couple of comments from Bleecker Street, and then we need to grab a quick commercial break here. Sure. Bleecker Street says, slab important comics and read them online. You don't go touching the Mona Lisa. And bro, I feel that in my bones. I prefer omnibus or facsimile, but I'll read digital. My eyes are so bad, I find them easier to read.
100%.
Yes. Fine. There are so many ways to read comics now. That you can find a way to read a comic if you've got a slab. Promiscuous Time Traveler, if you just dial that number 1-567-318-6507. If you're overseas, I don't know if you have to hit the plus button, but it's 1-567-318-6507 here in the US. You can call in and it will ring here in the studio. But there's so many different ways to read and consume comics now that shouldn't be a hindrance so much for grading.
No, but if you have that Venn diagram where it doesn't cover up somebody who never wants to read digital, they never want to read a trade, yeah, I get it. I think you're creating a lot of barriers to enjoying the hobby myself, but hey, that's how you want to approach the hobby. But there are people like that. They refuse to read any of those methods. They only want to read raw single issues. For me, that just seems like a limiting thing because like you can't buy them all. I don't care unless you're one of the top 10 richest people in the world. You can't buy all the comic books you want to read. So I think trades and facsimiles and digital are excellent ways to expand your collection, but I get it if you don't want to.
All right. K-Pop Junkie, it's 567-318-6507, 1-567-318-6507. We're going to grab a quick commercial break. Jay, short, real quick commercial break. We will be right back in just a second here on The Experience and on Bronze Age Nerd.
You just finished the last episode of your favorite news show, and you just have to talk about it. But all your friends are ghosting you because of that incident last week at the buffet. Oh, you know the one. What you did to that chowder. Ugh. Keeps me up at night. So what do? Join writer Dan Wickline as he breaks down all your favorite pop culture media. Whether it's a review of the latest nerdy TV show or a dive back into the history of your favorite comic characters, Dan's ready to discuss all the hottest topics live. Join the conversation as Dan live streams Tuesday through Thursday at 5 Eastern, 2 Pacific on Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. The Dan Wickline Show on The Experience, comic culture and sales.
Did you know that every Experience show, including some exclusive content, streams on Twitch? Check it out, twitch.tv/the _EXP. Or just scan that QR code. Welcome back, everybody.
Hey.
This
so
is
Kyle, I'm gonna make a co-executive decision here after reading Hector Ortiz. I think probably Hector Ortiz's comment here. Digital isn't anywhere close to actually holding a copy. Physical reading. I think next week we are doing digital versus physical. You agree?
Yes, 100% digital versus physical. It's Led Zeppelin versus Daft Punk next week here on the show. And I will tell you, Hector, I was in that camp literally 2 weeks ago. And then something happened to change my mind. And we'll talk about it next week.
And by the way, respect your opinion, by the way, Hector. I'm not trying to, I'm just saying, like, hey, this is a great topic to dive into. That's the point.
100%. And I think there are, as with everything, I think in this industry, there is a certain amount of nuance to digital versus physical. And we need to, digital sexiness versus physical sexiness, case closed. I need you to define sexiness, Mark. If you mean, one certain kind of sexiness, well, that's different than a certain other kind.
Like K-pop saying, yep, you can zoom in on the saucy bits. Guys, that phone line is open. If you need the phone number held back in the chat, K-pop, just highlight it here, scroll up a little bit. We probably have time for another good phone call. If you want to put one in, now's your chance to do so.
And if you're struggling, and let me know, you can email me, Kyle at theexplive.com. Jay will put my email in the chat. If you're struggling to call in and you're overseas, let me know. That may be something I need to work out with the phone provider. I'm more than glad to do it. Just, I need to know that that's a thing. So I have 3 things that are on my don't slab list.
Okay.
And one of them we've already kind of talked about in a different forms, but I called it investment. Don't get book slabbed as a way to increase the value. It is a thing that happens, but it's not a thing that you can count on. It's not something like, I don't know what you could do to a comic that would definitely increase its value over time forever. Right? Because books fluctuate. Right? I suppose other than dipping it in gold, which is probably worse than getting it slabbed. I don't know what you could do that would guarantee an increase in value over time. So that's one thing, but we've talked about it does increase value. It does have some benefits there. So it's not a great reason not to slab something. Speculation. Don't slab a book because other people tell you should. Right? Like, slab a book because you've decided that the reasons are good to slab it.
And one of those reasons could be speculation.
All right, we got another phone call.
Sounds good.
Hey, it's another Kyle. Welcome in, another Kyle.
Yes. How's it going?
Hey, Promiscuous, what's up?
Not much. How you guys doing?
Doing great. What can we help you out with tonight?
Don't slab, right? Because I'm a big, huge advocate for not slabbing comic books.
Okay.
I understand that it can set like a price point basically for people who like to resell their books, but I just don't see the purpose in encapsulating like a piece of paper, like an organic material in plastic. I mean, we already do it with bags and boards anyways, and top loaders if you want to get more into it. Just like everything's like another step of like sealing it. Soon there'll be like, you'll put there's slab like boxes that you can have too that'll like slide individual slabs in like the BCW boxes, those hard plastic ones. It's just, how ironclad does the protection need to be for a comic book?
It's a great question, and I'm going to dive in on that one if you're cool with that, Kyle. Co-host Kyle. Here's how I look at it. I look at it from a buyer's perspective when I think about the question you're asking. And I'm putting myself in the shoes of a lot of people that have asked me for advice over the years I've been doing the YouTube channel, or even before that, about comic books. And no matter, even though to me, to you, to a lot of people, grading seems pretty simplistic, like understanding, like, at least what is low grade, mid grade, or high grade, that kind of stuff. It seems very easy to understand to me. But I encounter people all the time that have no idea between like a low and a mid grade. I think most of them can kind of judge what a high grade is. And they have questions about, am I being ripped off on this deal? Is that a good price? There's Grade My Comic forums on every type of comic book collecting kind of, group I can think of. And it's not necessarily just people that care about resale value, but also people that worry, am I paying too much for this comic book? Is this a good deal? And in theory, I think there are flaws with how this works out in practice, but in theory, having a third party, an impartial third party, which I kind of use sneer quotes on both of those terms, to say, hey, this is an 8.0 copy of X-Men 95. Kind of takes some of the guesswork out of it for people, or at least gets us to where we're probably within the same ballpark about the grade of that comic book.
Okay.
And in doing so, that buyer can now buy with a little bit more confidence at a certain price point, looking up historical price data. So I think that's one kind of counterpoint to having, other than just having it protected, to having it actually graded by a particular company, and also ensuring that there's no restoration, that it's authentic, or at least coming pretty close to that. There's always edge cases.
Yeah, or the corners haven't been cut or trimmed. Like
exactly. Exactly. Color touch or whatever.
One of the other things that I always come back to with slabbing is that it's the crock pot of comic collecting. And what I mean by that is it's very much a set it and forget it kind of way of collecting. And we've talked about you can't really forget it. But when I had my store, I can't tell you how many people would come into the store. Oh, these comics are in the original plastic that they came in.
I love it.
Was it starting to flake and like turn into the plastic dust?
No, but they'd be sticky because the plastic has started to break down. Because instead of putting them in Mylars, they put them in polypropylene. Because instead of changing their bags and boards out every few years like you're supposed to, they put them in a box in 1978 and then smoked weed around them for another 25 years and then decided they wanted to sell them for drug money, and now they're trash. It's one of those things that for me, if somebody brings me a slab as a retailer, I have the negotiation is so much simpler. I don't have to explain to them that for 30 years they've been ruining their comics by having a cigarette habit. I don't have to explain to them that for 30 years storing them in grandma's garage was a bad idea. It makes my life as a retailer easier. So I could say to you, this is what I'm willing to offer you. Here's a website, an app. Here's a million places you can find fair market value based on what this piece of paper says. And then you can determine whether or not I'm making a fair value to you. Does your bird have an opinion? I love that. But you know,
would you like me to move away from the bird?
No, it's fine.
It's cool. It's just funny. Your bird has a very strong opinion about slabbing.
Opinion about slabbing, and I love it. If your bird could talk and it said screw CBCS or screw CGC, it'd be the best part of the show right now.
Oh yeah, that'd be
awesome. I knew that parrot.
Yes, but no, as a retailer, it does take a lot of that animosity that people there's a significant portion of the comic collecting community that, unfortunately, because of the internet and because of spec groups and all these people, believe that retailers are out to screw you. They want to pay you 30% of what a book is worth. Well, if you know what your book is,
they have to resell it,
right? But if you know what your book is, and I tell you this is what I'm going to offer, you can go. There's a bunch of more places that say this is what a 4.0 graded copy costs. Then you have to figure all that stuff out, and then say, I think you're trying to rip me off. And me go, well, I think you have a 2.0. So I'm making you an offer based on what I know. You're making a guess based on what you know. It takes that out, and it just lets money move. And that's valuable to me, at least.
Yeah, there's a couple, when you're bringing up your question for Promiscuous, which again, I love it. I can see some pros and cons on the buying and selling side for why it may be beneficial. And all of that under the umbrella, again, of there's nothing permanent about this process that you've done to slab that comic book. So if the buyer or the seller is thinking like, I don't really want that thing in the plastic after this is done, it doesn't have to be. In some cases, of course, the graded price is going to be a lot more than the raw price, but not always. And I think it kind of is one of those things that kind of helps maybe ease the negotiation. Like you and I have looked at a book before, Kyle, and we've both said, I think it's this, and you kind of said, like, I think it's this. But if a third party company has said it's this, it kind of takes away some of that shot in the dark.
The guesswork.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Now, kind of spinning off what you were saying earlier, if you have to, if it's recommended to change your bags and boards, like we've just discussed.
Yeah.
When is it recommended to change your slabs, or have slabs not been around long enough that we don't know what the deterioration process is? Is it slowed down?
Steve,
like when should you re-slab, I guess is.
So Steve Borak originally said for CGC, around the time he left for CBCS, he said 5 years. I know a person that I admired and respected here on YouTube that actually almost worked for CGC. Unfortunately, he doesn't do the game anymore, but his name was ETA Nick. He's a fantastic channel. Go seek out his stuff if you can. He did this awesome experiment where he was talking about, I think he was a Star Wars #1 that was in the original holder from the early days of CGC. And so that had been, at the time, I'm thinking like 15 years, I want to say, when he made the follow-up is how old that had been in the slab. Okay. And it hadn't degraded at all because he was very careful about how he stored his slabs in that kind of cool, dry place, having it climate controlled. He was aware of all those factors. And I think it didn't receive any kind of grade loss when he sent it back in, if I recall correctly. And I think that's kind of where you're at with it, is you can extend the lifetime of that quite a bit by how you store your comic books, raw and graded, of course. But the general vibe I would do is it depends on the age of the book a little bit. An older book's going to be a lot less forgiving than a newer book. If I had, a golden age book or something like that I really wanted to make sure was getting updated regularly, I would probably be in like the 5 to 7 year camp personally.
Yeah. So for me, my silver and gold, I send in every 5 to 6 years, depending on just my schedule. Right. Some stuff waits a 6th year because I'm just not submitting anything in a time, in time.
Okay.
But at the same time, my newer stuff, I've got some stuff that's in the 7 or 8 year range that I probably won't send for another 2 or 3. Part of it, and you guys, some of you may remember there was a scandal at CGC a few years ago where they changed the inner bag and it got wavy. That was because they were trying to upgrade the quality of the plastic in that inner bag, that, to make it last longer. And they went backwards. They screwed up. They had to re-slab tons of stuff.
Translate.
They had to re-slab tons of stuff for free. It was great. But the technology is still progressing. We've not seen the final form of slabbing yet. Right, Mark said it so. But I remember that specifically because I had sent a bunch of books out right before that news broke. And like I had Sex Criminals #1, like a 1 in 1,000. I bought it from the artist at a convention. I loved the cover. Cool. And I'd sent it out. And it comes back and man, it looked like somebody had spilled water on the cover because it was so wavy in that plastic. So I had to send it back and get it reholdered. And they put different plastics. So they're still developing. So I think the older the book and the worse condition it is, the more frequently you should be taking care of that book to begin with. And then the newer books with the, coated paper and all this other BS that are part of comics now, you can let them live a little longer without having to worry about them as much, because again, the technology has improved so much. News pulp. I have comic strips in my collection that are on pulp, that are literally, if you go like this, the paper just shreds into what looks like, mini wheats.
Oh wow!
Right. They're from the late 1940s, and I got to deal with them way more often than I have to deal with even my Golden Age comics, in terms of making sure that they're rotating and they're flat, and that the boxes I store them in are new and clean and sealed. It's ridiculous, but it's part of that knowing what you're getting into when you're collecting.
Yeah.
So Bleecker says CGC says every 5 years, CBCS says lifetime. That's kind of what I'm hearing, because the guys who founded CBCS maybe learned from the mistakes of CGC.
And I think that's part of the reason why Steve Borak made the comments he did. By the way, I said that without even explaining that. If you don't know who Steve Borak is, he's essentially one of the individuals that founded CGC and helped go over and start CBCS. He's since moved on from CBCS, but he's kind of the grandfather of slabbing comic books in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So Promiscuous, I appreciate you calling in, man.
Yeah.
Make sure
Absolutely.
it's always great to talk to people, especially new people that I don't know. It's always great to meet another Kyle. So it's good to meet you.
I'll see you in Texas, right? Ohio's not too far away at the Kyle meetup.
Yeah. Oh, I wish I thought about it, but I couldn't convince Jen King and Space Cadets Collection to fly me down and give me an appearance at their store, because I'm one of the Texas Kyles that doesn't rate an appearance at a comic book store, apparently.
Understood.
But
all right. Well, I got a siren going by. I'm gonna. Do you mind if I hop out?
All right.
All right. Thanks, Kyle.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Nice talking to you.
Bye bye.
Nice talking to you too. Hey, real fast, I want to. So there's a kind of a common thread appearing in chat that I want to address. There's and Mark, I'm going to highlight your joke comment, because first of all, it's a great joke. Second of all, because it kind of sums it up. One thing we didn't really get to tonight, and it's kind of out of the scope of the more basic interpretation we're taking to this question, is I'll say the integrity of grading comic books, the how much we can put faith into the companies behind doing this, and some of the scandals like Mark mentioned in chat, or a lot of the other comments that I'm seeing. I know Leonard was saying some stuff earlier. By the way, if you followed my content, if you're not aware of who I am, I have had serious, constructive criticisms of companies like CGC and CBCS and others several times. And it's something that I don't shy away from. I am by no means somebody who's going to say, like, these companies are great, please go slab more comic books there. There are a lot of integrity factors that comes into the idea of slabbing, and things that I want to see a much higher degree of transparency on, other things like that. Those are things that are going to add a lot of texture to a conversation like this, and something that I think it would be great if we covered, probably not super soon since we just talked about this topic, but in an upcoming episode, it's something we could definitely talk about, or hammer home a little bit more about all the different aspects of the integrity of those comic book grading companies. There we go.
Mark, I've seen it. It's great. I actually was at a independent wrestling promotion, and instead of chair spots, they were doing slab spots. It was the greatest thing I've ever seen. I'm sure they bought those, you can buy them in the store, the screw-on slabs. They weren't real CGC or CBCS slabs, but gives a real nice pop over the head. It's pretty great. And you don't get knocked out nearly as easy.
Thanks, Sleek Geek. I appreciate you saying it was a great topic tonight. Hopefully people were enjoying that. Yeah, some other great points. Buddy points out that CBCS hermetically seals their books. Yeah, they are. Their slabs are definitely a lot higher quality as far as the plastic seal goes. They don't have that creak. They don't have that gap, all that stuff. I do wonder about the off-gassing that happens and not being able to let any of that out, but I trust that it's probably a better process.
Their newest upgrade has a way. I don't fully understand it, but it has a thing.
Cool. Oh, that's a good point too, Keith. I'm kind of getting caught up here. Collecting slabs is because it helps limit your collection. There's only so much space you can store slabs. That's true. That's true. Kind of as a pro and a con, really. The way you're looking at it, Keith, I really respect that because you're looking at it as kind of a pro there. You're kind of helping it. I think there's a lot to be said for limiting the size of your collection. In my opinion, that's a very personal opinion that people have. A lot of people end up with a really huge collection and they're kind of like, what have I done at a certain point? And it's hard to go back unless you want to become a seller. But also the flip side of that is, I have there's probably too dark to see. I have a bunch of these slab storage BCW bins back here. That's a lot that could hold a lot more raw comic books than it does the slabs. So something to keep in mind for sure.
So we're into our second hour, so we're gonna keep rolling here. The last thing I have in Don't Slab land is don't slab new books unless they fall into one of the categories you set up for yourself as always slab. And the reason I say that is a bag and a board, which we've talked about, is just as effective and it uses way less energy and costs way less on a book that's going to fluctuate a lot more than older books. So in my don't slab pile, I always include new books just because, again, I'll let them sit for a couple of years and see, when you're thinking about a value proposition, new books are going to move a lot more than older books in terms of value. But if they fall into any of those categories, like for me, where it's, I want to preserve this book because it's important to me. It's an important book to me, or I need to verify that this is what I say it is. Like my ASM 300 or not 300, my ASM 800, the one that's the skyscraper variant with all the different.
Oh yeah.
With the people's names, I have it signed by almost every person on that cover.
Awesome.
That's a new book that I have to have slab to verify what it is. So that's the caveat to that last rule. For me at least.
Well, and to kind of jump in on that, when it comes to those modern books, I'd almost argue that some of those books, another topic for another show, is this kind of concept of whether or not selling is, or flipping, let's call it that, whether or not flipping is good or bad for the hobby, and that's a great topic for another show. When it comes to this idea of certain books you pick up, if you have a super limited exclusive so-and-so hot cover ratio or something like that, and you're looking to sell it within the next couple months after it comes out, and it's in a 9.8 kind of quality, if you're able to eyeball it and kind of tell that, hey, that's a 9.8, you're throwing money away essentially if you were to sell it raw versus not selling it in a 9.8 slab. And if that is your goal, some of you out there are cringing because you're like, flipping comic books is evil. And again, we'll dive into that at a different time. That is one of those things where if you don't do it, you're kind of just leaving money on the table. If you have that in that kind of quality, because some other collector, some other flipper or whatever is going to look at that and then go, well, that's a 9.8. I'm gonna buy that, slab it, and then sell it to somebody else for 5 times the price, because that is the value placed on a 9.8 copy of that comic book. Right, wrong, or indifferent, that's just the way the world works.
I love this comment.
Well, certain books recently became a hot book because too many people had it.
Dude.
Oh man, I love that. That is awesome.
It's true.
Yeah.
And so like Mark asked, do you want Han Solo and Carbonite or whooping it up on the Millennium Falcon? Well, my stance is I'd rather have Han Solo frozen in Carbonite than after he tried to reconcile with his son. So like, it's all a matter of degrees at that point.
It's a great point. Yeah, by the way, as far as the as it CSTIFX, don't try how I'm supposed to pronounce that. The certain books becoming recently hot and then being at CGC or whatever, that's something I talk about. I do a series of videos called Top 5 Not to Buy. It's probably my most popular series, where I look at the hot list, like the CBSI Hot 10, the Key Collector Trending 20, and all that. and I pick some books that I think are not necessarily good investments, in my personal opinion. And then I do a price follow-up. And one of the things that happens on the 6 month later follow-up, especially when CGC was really backed up during the pandemic, is you notice that there were like no sales anymore at a certain point. And I could almost tell you every single time it's because all the brand new, nice quality copies were off at CGC still. Now they're turning around to something like a few weeks to a month instead of 6 to 8 months. But you could basically pinpoint that as something that was happening. That's great you bring that up.
Yeah. So there's some comments here. Sean, I figured that's who it was. Talking about selling my very first comic I ever bought, which is Batman TMNT #1. If it's important to you, do what you think is right.
Yeah.
Right. That's the end of the conversation. Really.
Agreed.
I love this. I do too, Keith, to be honest with you. But that's just because like I'll go on the channel and just like hit playlist and go.
That's a good, I like that method. Everybody should go do that every once in a while.
Right. And I'll pick up modern slabs once the initial FOMO dies down, usually get a second lap spike, buy low, sell high. Mm-hmm. Right. There are a lot of ways to play this game when it comes to slab comics. And you have to make the right decisions for you.
Mark, I love it.
Mark, I co-sign on that. We should make that show happen. Hey, I know a guy who has a whole channel you could do it on if you don't want to do it on your own. Nick is going to make a dad joke in the comments. Yeah. I'm no selling.
I'm just waiting.
Right. Thomas Bishop asked, "What do what feels right to you? CBCS and CGC prices are what they are." Yep. It's true. Make your decision. I'm a Samsung guy. Other people are Sony's. I'm an Apple computer guy. Other people are Dell. You do what feels right to you. It can be true. God,
I love it. The
I'm
dad in me.
A 5-minute timeout.
Nick, I'll tell you what though. I am telling my daughter that joke tomorrow. 100%.
Oh yeah, no. My 5-year-old nephew will call me in like 4 hours, and I will definitely tell him that joke. So I had one last thing I had in my notes, and then we can wrap unless we want to keep talking because we're having a great conversation. I had other factors that need to be considered. Again, this is where I was coming from when I did my last show is, you got to know what you're doing. You got to be a better collector. Turnaround time, y'all, they're all over the place and they're not super reliable. So just know when you jump into this, you're going to get a book graded, just know you might have to live a whole year before you get your book back. My brother-in-law sent a stack of Spider-Mans in Memorial Day weekend last year, and he got them Easter weekend this year back. Like, that's a long time.
Well, and here's a real world example from the Bronze Age nerd. You can kind of learn from my mistakes. So I went to Rose City Comic Con 2 years ago, and I had the honor of meeting Tony Fleece. We had an awesome conversation. It was a great time. Since then, I've met Trish Forstner and talked to her and had great conversations with her. Love the Stray Dogs team and all the stuff they do. So I had him sign a couple books. Had him sign about 3 books, and 2 of them, one of them was for me. It was a personal collection book. I wanted it. 2 of them I was going to sell. They weren't something, they were extra copies of my straight out books. They weren't my copies I'm keeping for my personal collection. And I have him sign those books, and I have CBCS witness the signatures, and I make that decision after I've left the con, and they're going to encapsulate the books and verify the signatures and all that, authorize the signatures, authenticate. That's the word I'm looking for. I make the decision down the road. I'm like, oh, you know what? He had one of those galleries, like a 1 per store gallery of Stray Dogs that came out, and he had that at his booth. So I bought it from him, and that's one of the ones I had him sign. And to me, that was a book I was going to flip. And I said, I think that book was kind of handled a little roughly. Had been sitting at his con. People had been looking at it, sitting at his booth. I'm gonna hit up Steve Borak, at the time he was still at CBCS, and I'm gonna say, hey, can we move that book over to the cleaning and pressing side? I had never submitted books with CBCS before. I did not know how backed up they were for the cleaning and pressing side of their business. 15 months later, I got those books back because he put my whole, he did exactly what I wanted to do. He put my whole order in their cleaning and pressing service queue, which was so backed up that it took me 15 months to get those books back. Well, Stray Dogs is not worth the money then that it was. So I'm just holding on to those books, just, kind of in a holding pattern until Stray Dogs ever becomes popular again. That's a real consideration you have to make when you're slabbing is what is the turnaround time? If you submitted books at the beginning of the pandemic before all that happened and the turnaround times just started ramping up and up and up and up, some people were without really hot books that they wanted to sell or turn around for a very long time. It's a serious consideration you have to make. Once you send that book off, you don't know what's going to happen to it or how long it's going to be gone, even if the turnaround time is, walk through or whatever. That doesn't necessarily mean anything. Walkthroughs were taking 5 or 6 months at one point.
Yeah. So I starred Mark's comment. I want to come back to it in a few minutes here. Keith, I never collect shame anyone. I know a guy who collects coverless books. Another one collects pages to each. I 100% agree. Do what you like and don't listen to anybody who tells you any differently. 100%. So one of the other things I had on my list is the economy of comics. Books are becoming hot and then cooling off so fast these days. R.I.P. ODB, baby.
Hey, dirty baby, you got my money.
Oh, I'm gonna have to listen to that on the ride home now. But no, the economy of comics is so fluctuating right now. I don't even know how to describe it. It's pits and valleys and mountains and valleys, and it's wild. That if you're going to grade books, you got to know you might miss your window. So that's a knock against grading. But at the same time, I'm a fan of, if you're going to grade a comic, you got to play the long game. If you're going to grade a comic, you have to understand that you may be spending bad money after good, but good is 10 years down the road.
Ooh.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that at the end of the show, Nick. And about how you're just going to put page 18 in the mail for me, right?
No, it was going to me. Sorry, Kyle.
You could scan one and send it to Bronze, and I'll take the original. And then in a few months, we'll swap. We'll just joint custody, which may be what I have to do anyway to be able to afford it. It's
right.
Buy it with a partner.
Yeah, exactly.
So other things on my list, cost. The cost of grading is fluctuating. A good use of money today is a bad one tomorrow. It's until you know what you're going to wind up spending forever, you don't know what you're investing. I've had books. I've sent in stuff where 6 months later I get an addendum to my invoice. Oh, because it wound up costing this much now because we determined that this book is worth yada yada yada, and you graded it wrong or you classed it wrong or whatever, or the insurance rate has gone up.
Yeah. Well, and man, I can't tell you like how big of a deal it is. Like the area this affects the most. That's a great point about the valuation of the comic book and how it affects the grading cost. The other one is people do whatever you want with your money, do whatever you want with how you collect and please, but really take a second to stop and consider what you're submitting. The amount of people that are just taking a new comic book off the shelf and sending it off to CGC, regardless of whether or not that comic book has any value. And they're not doing it for themselves. They're doing it because they want to sell that comic book. And they go, oh, well, as a 9.8, this is a 9.8. Yeah, but it's also, who cares, run filler from this new series that is issue number 17 and everybody's fallen off of it. And, maybe it's kind of a cool cover, but not really. The market is flooded with pointless submitted modern comics. Pointless, in my opinion, that people are clearly trying to sell. It's not like they're holding on to it and they love it. Be so careful doing that. Just really take a second.
Ironically, that's why I want to buy some of the art from Spider-Man 7 rather than a Spider-Man 7. If Spider-Boy winds up being garbage, which he very well could be, because we don't know yet what's going to happen, if it's going to be good. Could it be the next Miles Morales? 1,000%. Could it be the next Mary Jane's third cousin twice removed? from that one book that came out in the 90s that no one can yes. We don't know yet. I would much rather buy a piece of John Romita art because that's always going to go up in value. That's always going to be what it is, than buy the book that and hope it's going to be worth money later and it not be. He could be the next Aqua Baby. Ugh. I hope he's not the next Aqua Baby. I hope he's not another clone. But again, I would much rather invest in an original piece of comic art that's always going to be what it is, than anything else.
Yeah. The Keith brought up a great example. That's probably the one that I was Tosin. I mean, how hot was Tosin for 6 months after Black Panther 3 came out? Everybody was talking about it. And I think one of them still holding some decent value, but like the second print Tosin, first cover appearance of Tosin, you can buy that for cover price or less all day long now.
I work in the comic industry and I couldn't tell you what the hell a Tosin is.
I spoke to somebody
on radio and couldn't tell you what the hell a Post Malone is.
I spoke to somebody who had a meeting at Marvel, and I won't say the details because I don't think I was allowed to talk about it, but I can say generally. Somebody had a meeting with Marvel and they talked about Tosin, like, hey, maybe we should do something with this character, right? For like a cover or something. And the people at Marvel were like, why would you want to do that?
Right.
Marvel, you're talking like executives at Marvel being like, Tosin, you got to be really careful with this stuff, people. Every hot new character out there that people latch onto for spec purposes, not because they're an amazing new character alone, it can be a flash in the pan.
Right. Elektra would have been nothing if Elektra hadn't been dope over a long period of time.
Oh, and Keith, Tosin was not in Black Panther 2 in the post credits. That was Toussaint, or I don't know how to pronounce it exactly, but it's not the same person.
No. And that's the thing, right? It's like B price 68, buy silver and gold keys. Bro, that's buying literal gold. It might go down, but it's not going to go down nearly as much as buying NFTs or crypto.
Yeah.
Right?
It's going to go up or down with the economy, more or less.
Which is my last point. Everybody has to consider the economy of the economy. Inflation, if we don't raise the debt ceiling, all of these things that could have economic impact on the world as a whole is going to affect what value your things have and what you should do with them. So when we ask, should we slab things? I don't have the same amount of spare money laying around that I did during the pandemic. I don't have the same amount of spare money that I had laying around end of last year. So I'm sending a lot less to be graded now than I was a year ago this time. And so it's this idea of understanding what your money is actually doing, your actual paper money, to know what you're going to do with your paper money.
Yep.
And so that's an important kind of concept to think about.
Oh no, Keith, we've gone too far. We've gone too far the other way.
Right.
No, do whatever you want. Do whatever you want, Keith. Yeah. And speaking directly to that, like I'm submitting literally 100% less comic books to CGC or any of the grading companies right now than I was compared to last year. Actually, I'm coming up right around a year where I haven't submitted anything. Now, I had a lot of reasons why I didn't do that. And a lot of those are complicated. Probably something that'll come up in another future episode. But I'll tell you, I'm at a point now where I have books where I need to sell them. They're not something that's in my forever collection. They're not something that I want to, this is a thought experiment that I run all the time. I think of my collection in 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, and what do I want it to look like? A lot of modern books, I don't necessarily want those in my collection, or it doesn't have to just be modern books. A lot of books that I see in my collection now, I don't want in the collection in the future. So what do? I can give them away. I can sell them. A lot of them, I'll probably sell them so I can buy comic books I do want in my collection 1 year, 3 years, 5 years down the road. And one of the things, like I said earlier, leaving money on the table. If you have certain books in certain conditions, you probably should grade those books to help lock in that value if your plan is just to sell them. For 25, 30 extra dollars, I can get an extra $100 out of that comic book. That to me is a no-brainer proposition as long as you want to do that.
Right. Nick, I see your comment. No, that was just a joke. I've just been no selling. I've been the Undertaker for the last few minutes. And promiscuous, there's something there, and we're going to have a conversation about that on the show.
Agreed.
It's a valid point. The thing about this is, and this is kind of maybe where we should end it, is that for every reason to slab a book, there's a reason not to slab a book. For every reason not to slab a book, there's a reason to slab a book. There is no right answer long term about this. It comes down to every collection that you have. And, we talked about buying gold and silver, and, but all those are already super expensive. So you need to think if it's even possible to find buyers for something that expensive. That's if you're looking to flip it. If you're looking to collect and invest, then it's a different conversation, isn't it? You could pay $2,000 for a book, but that doesn't mean you'll find someone to pay $2,500 a year later. You can buy what you like, not for economic value, but for what it means to you as part of your collection. Right.
Yeah.
When you buy books, you have to determine why you're buying a book. Are you buying it to flip it? Okay, then buy hot books and sell them right away. Don't send them off to get graded. Are you buying to invest? Then buy books that you know are more stable. And I'm not saying you got to go buy books from 1959, but great reason not to slab. Live in New Zealand. Well,
and by the way, Nick, I don't think your Aquaman 62 comment did go through. If it did, I didn't see it. So
yeah,
might want to resend that one.
Yeah. No. The reality of the situation is that before you ever spend any money, you should evaluate why you're spending money.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're buying it to flip it, then you need to buy. When I say new books, I'm talking about things like Spawn #1. I'm talking about things from the last 20 years, new books, current, modern, even real late Bronze Age stuff is a new book to me because so much of my collection is silver and gold, right? I have new stuff. I got a Peach Momoko slab right here as one of my examples of slabs, but that isn't what most of my collection is. So if you're buying it to flip it, buy the Peach Momokos. If you're buying it to have it forever, spend the money and know that someday, if you're lucky, it'll pay for your kid's college. Or in my case, a really nice casket.
I do want to address Sean's question here because I think, this is a great question that a lot of people have. There's not a great answer in my opinion, but I'll ask your question. Is there a reason why one slab like CGC is generally worth more than another company? Is it simply because one has been around longer? It's not simply because one has been around longer, although that does tie into it. CGC has become, for better or worse, the established brand. They have become the market leader, the Coca-Cola in the soft drink comparison. And I would say pretty comfortably, for better or worse, CBCS hasn't even established themselves as the Pepsi. They're kind of close. But they really have made, I will call them missteps along their way. They had times where they could have capitalized on stumblings that CGC had. They didn't seem to do so. What that all has led to is CGC remaining the market leader in most people's eyes. The biggest reason that most collectors will tell you is that CGC comic books tend to go for more in the same grade than, say, CBCS EGS, PGX, insert other grading company here, the competition. And that, in a lot of people's minds, obviously makes a big difference. So until that changes, by people being willing to pay closer to what CGC comic books are going for other grading companies, comic books, that same comic book in that same grade, we're probably not going to see that change too much. That's kind of my take on that, at least.
So for me, I always make a slightly different analogy when we talk about CGC, CBCS, PGX, those kind of things. CGC to me is Sony, right? They do everything well. And they have problems. Don't get me wrong. Anybody who's ever bought a pair of Sony headphones at a Walmart can tell you that. But they're Sony. You know what you're getting when you buy it. CBCS is Vizio. They're good, but about a third of maybe a little less than a third of the time, it's a lemon. It's got its problems. What did Mark say? CBCS makes unforced errors. Right. They're the minor league baseball team here. They're Vizio, they're whatever. And then PGX and the other companies, I can't even remember all the names of them because I ignore them so hard, are that company you buy from Amazon. You're paying $100 for an 80-inch TV, but God knows if it's going to work or not. So
yeah,
it's one of those things that you just kind of have to. You have to make your bed and then lie in it. I have been a supporter of CBCS since 2015. Very good friend of mine who we talk about is one of the CBCS reps who goes to conventions. I like the product I get. I understand the problems with it. Eddie's mullet, one of the best signs I saw from the WGA strike is if you can re-release Morbius, you can pay us a living wage, which is one of the greatest signs ever.
No, Mark, because Hydrox was first.
Right. CGC, if CGC are Oreos, Hydrox is, or PGX are those cookies that they gave you in elementary school, except they've been picked out of the dumpster, in my opinion.
They're like some regional supermarket chain brand that has come up with some clever play on the word tuxedo to call their cookie or something like that.
Right. They're the Aldi brand, except that the Aldi brand is good. So Mark asked a question a while back that I starred that I wanted to come back to. Serious question. Why is it so hard for a third-party slabbing alternative to truly break through? And it's a fair question. What's it going to take, I guess, for somebody else to enter the market and say, hey, we're planting our flag and actually truly compete?
Yep. This is one of my favorite topics. Something that I, in my heart of hearts, have pushed for, with all the mental energy that thinking about something really hard can actually accomplish. I haven't actually done anything, in other words, but I really wanted to see it happen. Talking about, just to go back to my soft drink analogy, there's been other good analogies, but if you have your Coke and you're looking for your Pepsi, by the way, I'm a Pepsi guy, so I want a Pepsi in the marketplace of the slabbing world, and I don't think there is one. You really have to have somebody come out with, ideally, a pedigree, somebody who is established in some way in the industry. I know this isn't happening. I'm not trying to say that they're the best person for this, but the name that comes to mind when I think about it is Overstreet. And they're not going to do it. It's not something that's going to be happening anytime soon. But that somebody who has been in the business, maybe Steve Borak with a new company, somebody who has some experience coming in and lending that pedigree. We need a reason to take you seriously. A grading company from another type of collectible. Somebody who has that pedigree. And the other thing they need is funding. They need to come out of the gates ready to take CGC down a peg or two. And that's tough because CGC is backed by Blackstone. If you're not familiar, Blackstone is a giant conglomerate that basically, buys and churns companies over and turns them into, they inject money into a company. that they believe in to prop it up and make sure that they're a market leader. We have to see somebody come in with the funding that can do that. And that is extremely difficult. But they have to basically not want to, hey man, I want to enter the space of grading and do some grading. Like, that's great, but it's not going to topple CGC or compete with them. Or, you know, why do I want this? I want the competitiveness in the market. I want, you know, CGC to be kept on their toes about some of the practices that a lot of us in chat are talking about and want to see change. And until there is somebody doing that, there is somebody challenging them every time they have one of those missteps, it's going to be hard for them to see any kind of financial reason to do so. That's why I want to see that kind of growth and kind of honesty by capitalism in the marketplace because of competition. So until we start supporting those other companies as customers and showing the market that there is a reason, there is a gap, there is a need in the market, it's going to be a tough sell.
I also think that some of the things that have been said here, inertia, too many people have invested in CGC slabs, you know, is one of the things. But I think it's going to take someone thinking the way Pepsi thought back in the 70s to actually do this. If you don't know, Pepsi existed for years before anybody drank Pepsi. You know, Pepsi's catchphrase was, "Is Pepsi okay?" Like, because everybody had Coke. But what Pepsi did was they went and bought Taco Bell and Pizza Hut and KFC. And all of a sudden, these fast food places only served Pepsi. And so if you wanted Taco Bell, you had to have Pepsi. If you wanted KFC, you had to have Pepsi. If you wanted Pizza Hut, you had to have Pepsi. And all of a sudden, their market share ballooned and grew so fast because those brands already had built-in customer bases that didn't really care what soft drinks you were buying. So for me, I think the way someone is going to have to break into this market is to, rather than CBCS, you know, just falling to third, CBCS is going to have to partner with other companies, with other services. So CBCS is going to have to become the official grading partner of Marvel, right? They're going to have to do something like Diamond did when they put Capital out of business and get some exclusivity. Get something where the brand preference to the second party is stronger than the brand preference to the first.
And that would work. That would definitely work. But man, that's a future I don't want to be part of. But
no, I don't think
it would work.
I don't think that's the right way to do it. But the official grading company of Midtown Comics.
Yeah.
The official grading CBCS has to have contracts with local comic shops or with Dynamic Forces or whoever to say, okay, well, I buy my books from this person. I want to get them graded. Well, now I have to get them graded at CBCS. And that's where the market share will increase and will become, you know, a top level thing. It's going to have less to do with CBCS and more to do with who people want to buy books from.
Yeah, and I just to kind of reinforce it, I think the problem I see over and over again is, you know, take any grading company besides CGC, and CGC, as we've discussed many times, has its own issues. I'm not saying they're perfect by any stretch of the imagination. PGX, well, they don't accurately grade their comic books. CBCS, well, they don't hold the resale value that so-and-so does. Up until recently, EGS, well, their slabs aren't as nice as CGC's or whatever. I don't like their labels as much or whatever it might be. A company that is going to enter the space would have to get rid of those objections. They'd have to answer those objections with solutions. A company that is already in the space and existing that wants to compete has to find an edge. They have to find a competitive value or a competitive reason for them to stay relevant in the industry and to gain market share. Adapt or die. I mean, there's got to be some kind of progress made in those, or else you're going to continue to see CGC be the king of the mountain, and that's it for the rest of time.
Right. It's you know, it's an interesting thing because we just went through it. It's DC departing Diamond for Lunar. and then look at the cascade that happened or that is currently happening. One brick is going to have to fall out of that CGC pyramid, and all of a sudden somebody is going to exist that's going to be a rival. And then it's going to be a matter of how do the rest of the bricks fall from there. And that's what's going to really turn the tables. It's something we're not thinking of because we're so used to the current existing market structure that somebody out there is going to go, hey, I have $1 billion I want to spend. Can we do this? And just shake everyone up, and then everybody's going to jump ship.
Yep.
So,
and if you don't believe that, if you think that's kind of smoke and mirrors, think about, CBCS versus CGC. What is the one edge that CBCS has every time?
Cheaper and hermetically sealed.
What's that?
It's cheaper and it's hermetically sealed.
Well, true. Those are kind of more texture things, but what's the clear number one advantage they have? Hey, I already have this book signed. I'd like to get it graded and authenticated. You're not going to do that from CGC.
Right.
Or, well, I mean, you're not going to get it and get a yellow label. Let's put it that way. You definitely can still do it, but that's everybody I've heard dozens of times. Oh, well, I guess I'm sending this to CBCS because it's already signed and I want to get it graded.
I really thought that when CBCS merged with Beckett, and they became one company, and now they're handling comics, coins, sports memorabilia, all this kind of stuff, that because that was going to be that name of Beckett is such a stronghold in other markets that it was going to raise the whole ship, and it didn't. It just kind of stayed where it was because CBCS at conventions doesn't take sports cards at a comic book convention. Why not? They're not capitalizing on Beckett and PGX. They're just kind of living in the world they live in, and that's a mess. So
78 points. I think to address your question, are you talking about Steve Borok? He left for My Comic Shop, which he has since left, and I totally have blanked on where he landed after that. But yeah, if that's what you meant, I'm sorry if you meant something else, but pretty sure that's what you're talking about. Yeah, it's one of those things where the market, the landscape of the market has changed a little bit. Unfortunately, not in a way that we have kind of the competition. And I think that kind of leads us to what we talked about. We have the great seeds for another conversation for a different episode here about the integrity, about the landscape of grading, and we will tackle those in a future stream for sure.
Mm-hmm. Next week, though, print versus digital. And I want to remind everybody who's still here, Friday night on The Experience, 7:00 Eastern Standard Time in the U.S., 4:00 Pacific. The original art experience, Nick will have original pages from Amazing Spider-Man 7.
Dust off your wallets.
Yes, the first appearance of your Spider Boys. So make sure you tune in for that. He's going to have some other dope stuff that he's going to offer, covers and things like that. It really is a comic art show for every budget, although this week might be a little exclusive in terms of that because of what it is. But there are weeks where you can almost certainly every week find something on that show that anyone can afford. So make sure you tune in for that. Over on The Experience, it's on the Experience channel. So hit our YouTube page, hit our Facebook page, all those places, and hit the bell so you know when those shows are.
Yeah, and if you're watching us over on my channel, over on Bronze Age Nerds YouTube channel, thank you for doing that, first of all. And if you are watching, there is a link in the description where you can go over to the EXP. Again, we have, I think, about one more episode. We're probably going to do this where we're on both channels at the same time. The beauty of going over to the EXP and watching over there, which I highly recommend doing, is not only are you going to be subbed up for all that other great content like Nick's live art shows on Fridays, there's also other ways you can watch. Like you can watch their Facebook. They are simulcasting and streaming to multiple services at the same time. So if you don't prefer to be on YouTube and you want to watch on Facebook or Twitch or whatever, you can do that as well. So
Mhm.
I appreciate you guys going and doing that, because pretty soon that's going to be the only way to watch me on Monday nights here over on the EXP.
Absolutely. Tickety Talk is soon. I've been promised we can stream live on TikTok soon.
I'm going to make my TikTok debut.
That's a story for another day about what a nightmare that's been, but soon. So thanks everybody for tuning in. Make sure you're subscribed to both The Experience and the Bronze Age Nerd. Hit the bell on both channels. That's always helpful because then you get the notifications when there's new stuff. And we will see you all very, 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 very soon.
Peace out, everybody.
Join the party. Head over to our link tree to find all the links for everywhere The Experience is all the time.